Hi, students. We're here today with Troy Hicks, whose work I've admired for a long, long time. And Troy has been writing and thinking about writing and thinking for quite a long time now. And I'm going to ask him to introduce himself and tell us a little bit initially about the kind of work he's been doing. Troy?
Great. Thank you, Joyce, and ditto. I've been following your work and appreciating all that you've done for a while too. I'm Troy Hicks. I am a professor at Central Michigan University. I began my career in the English department at Central Michigan, and I just recently switched over to teacher education to be part of the educational technology master's and doctoral program. So I've taught pre-service teachers in the past. I'm more working with in-service teachers and future researchers now. And then I also direct our Chippewa River Writing Project, which is a site of the National Writing Project. So get to work with teachers in all kinds of different ways in the classroom, online, through professional development, those types of things. So the kind of short background into how I got into the digital writing piece is that when I initially began my career, and I'll even step back into my undergraduate days, I was a writing center consultant at Michigan State University. At that time, that was right about when email and this crazy thing called the World Wide Web was getting underway. And Michigan State gave all students some personal web space. And so at the Writing Center, we were trying to figure out, what can we help writers do? Suddenly we've got this new space for them to compose, and we can do really interesting things like insert hyperlinks and images and videos and change fonts and colors and backgrounds and link to our own content and other content. And that's where the journey began. So I finished my undergrad at Michigan State, taught for a few years, pursued my master's during that time, also from Michigan State, had a mentor kind of take me under his wing and say, have you ever given this PhD thing a consideration? And went back to Michigan State for the third time and ended up back in the Writing Center again. That's where I got connected with the National Writing Project. And I've been working with teachers ever since. So interestingly, some of those questions that guided me as an undergraduate in the Writing Center, what does it mean to put a link in a document? What does it mean to insert an image? Can I insert my own image or can I use someone else's? Those are still the questions that I'm asking today and helping teachers ask today, thinking about this new world of digital writing on everything from computer screens to phones and tablets, and where it is that we can actually put our writing out into the world. So that's kind of the long story short of how I got here.
Great. So we're both working with the same types of students right now. I have students who are pre-service teacher librarians, and some who come to our course for professional development as well. And I want my students as well, and I know you want your students, to go out there and work with K-12 learners and push the notion of writing to be communicators in the most effective and possibly the most creative possible ways.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you see as the possibilities for writing effectively and creatively?
Yeah, so I appreciate that question because I think it combines the best of what we know about information literacy and taking what's out there and then adding our own creativity and voice to it. So I think there's a variety of things we can do. I mean, at one level, we have social media, which allows us to simply retweet or like or tumble or reblog or do whatever it is that we're going to do to say, hey, somebody else has created something, I'm just going to share it again. And in that way, I'm endorsing it and I'm putting it out there. All the way up to, yes, I can use a full creative suite of very expensive tools, but somewhere in the middle now, we have open source tools and web-based tools that allow us to do a lot of the things that were previously reserved for professionals. So, Henrik Jenkins, of course, writes about this and this idea of the convergence culture and prosumers and what is it that we're able to do now with a computer or even with our smartphone that we weren't able to do before. And I think that's where we need to engage teachers and then in the next step, their students in these really important conversations, because it's one thing, yes, to be able to create a Prezi or create a PictoChart or to create something on Adobe Spark. And chances are it'll probably look pretty good. But if we fall back into the trap that we've always had, even with earlier educational technologies and some that are still out there, PowerPointless being probably the prime example of that. If we just have pretty content but no substance, then it doesn't really matter. So my angle to all of this and thinking about digital writing comes from a rhetorical tradition. This was actually, again, something I learned as an undergraduate at MSU's Writing Center, and I carried it with me and adapted. My mentors at the time would call it warmed over Aristotle, but they talked about the mode, the audience, the purpose, and the situation. And I've added kind of a second piece to the M where I think about media. So yes, we could tell a story, but are we going to use the medium of a podcast? Are we going to use a digital story? Are we going to create an interactive piece of fiction on a website? Is it going to be serial fiction that's released on a blog or through social media? Similarly, if we're going to compose an argument, are we going to create our argument as a series of blog posts? Are we going to create an infographic or a series of infographics? Are we going to bring in, live public tweets from, celebrities or political figures or other things like that as part of the website that we're creating and the argument we're trying to make? So we have all these affordances with all these technologies and things that we can do, but the core of it is still a writing process. We need to consider audience. We need to consider purpose. We need to consider the situation or the context. To whom am I speaking? What purpose am I trying to go for? In the big sense of to argue or to entertain or to inform. Those are kind of the big ones. But then even within that, what does it mean to argue? Well, am I trying to completely berate and persuade, put someone down and bring them over to my side? How could you possibly be thinking that? Or is another kind of argument more dialogic, where let's actually have a conversation and go back and forth? So even in that purpose, we have to think about what are the verbs, what's the kind of thinking we want our students to do, and then how can that medium best help us accomplish that, or what combination of media can best help us accomplish that. So that's how I come at it from a writing perspective, and more recently I've been thinking about that from kind of a reading / viewing / interpretive perspective too. But definitely as a writer, I want teachers and their students to understand that we have this multitude of choices, but we need to choose wisely.
So that brings me back to, oh my goodness, how do we scaffold this for students who, or young writers who may not be aware of all the choices they have, and also may not the basics of good writing? Where do we get started? As a librarian, I want to not only scaffold, but I want to curate possibilities. So I want to be able to think about maybe how I'm going to help students organize the ideas that they have. So I'm going to want to help them by giving them some strategies for that. And I'm also going to want to curate the many different ways they communicate. You're talking about, we're no longer dealing with text on screen only, and we're not dealing with pencil on paper, but we're dealing with the notion of kind of smashing together that look like writing in the long run, because we're able to, as Jenkins with, it's remix culture too. This is not even becoming a question, I realize. It's like, oh my God, how do I get my students to kind of get a handle on where to start as they're approaching some kind of writing project with learners? Mm-hmm. Does that lead to any responses?
Yeah. So thinking about our youngest learners, of course, one thing that I often say in presentations and workshops is that for my own children and for all children, I still want them to be able to compose with something like this and to actually be able to scribe and put letters into words, into sentences, into paragraphs on paper. And so at no point do I want the digital tool to become a gimmick or to become something that's, oh, we're just doing this for motivation and engagement and it won't be so exciting. Like, yes, it will, but you're also doing it because you're teaching them how to write and to compose in new media. And they should be competent writers in old or traditional media as well. So with that in mind, I mean, I think that, so to take kind of an informational piece that you might be teaching to very young learners, kindergartners, first graders, second graders, how is it that we can help them go and find information on the internet and then use some of their skills for organizing that information to use an app like Book Creator? Like, okay, I can find a picture, say it's going to be the animal report. I can find a picture of the snow leopard, and I can give credit to National Geographic. And not only can I find the facts, but then what other flourishes of narrative writing could you add in there? Yes, some texts are purely informational, and yet at the same time, we could still introduce something as simple as a metaphor. The snow leopard crept like a breeze coming down the mountain or something like that.
Because in our world, we've really tried to move students beyond basic reporting in their writing, and that's not, when we as librarians, we think about inquiry, and I'm sure you do too, and we think about elements of, how do I own this information? What can I add to add to the knowledge, and how do I process it so I can make meaning from this? And so thinking about the animal metaphorically, or imagining that what would happen if it was removed from an ecosystem, that forces you to understand what this animal is and what its role is. But it also asks a question like, what if, or so what, or why, right? Yep. And for me, that's an important element. And I would want my students to not do reporting in the very basic way ever, really. Although maybe there's a reason for it. But I love the notion of adding metaphor to it.
Yeah.
Sorry if I'm taking us in a different direction.
Oh, no. Well, actually, I think the thinking that you're sharing here, that's where the media can become really interesting, right? So I could use Book Creator. I could create, for lack of a better term, a purely informational text. And then yet I could also record my voice and have this kind of underlying narrative that goes throughout it. Or I could include a hyperlink that says, oh, go find out about this, and then make a Weebly website where, I just put a little bit more information or something like that. So I think that this is where it gets challenging, right? Because what's the instructional goal? Is the instructional goal to teach students how to read, comprehend, and then produce informational text? Or is the instructional goal about integrating hyperlinks? Or is the instructional goal about, getting them to craft a narrative? Yes, right? Like, it's all of those things. And I think this is where it opens up opportunities for differentiation, where it opens up opportunities for students to take ownership over their writing in different ways. Maybe you do have someone who is really curious to learn about recording and using Audacity to record themselves and putting those out there. Maybe you have another student who really likes to draw, but those drawings don't necessarily fit within the context of the informational book, but you could make links to them and go out and view this other story. So part of it is kind of pushing back against our schooly notions of writing. My friend and colleague Ian Whitney talks about the schoolishness of, writing reports and book reports and things like that. And so how can we not be quite so schooly and think about what the digital writing opportunities allow us as well? I think that's both the interesting challenge and, yet the unique opportunity that we have. And yes, it can go in a lot of different directions. But personally, that's what's kind of exciting about it to me.
So what examples of really effective practice have you seen? or I know you've collected models of great storytelling and good digital writing. What would inspire my students? What kinds of things have you seen?
Oh, well, one thing I think that holds true in all reading and writing workshops, whether it's digital or not, is this idea of mentor texts. So anytime you as a reader or a viewer come across, or a listener come across a mentor text, and that could be anything from, you know, a story on Radio Lab that uses sound effects in really interesting ways and music in the background. It could be a video that somebody produced on their own and posted to YouTube, and you found the way in which they told the story to be really unique. Or it could be a particular website. Like, for instance, I've used the story Snowfall from the New York Times. It's a nonfiction piece about an avalanche, and it goes into all these different sub stories about the different people that were involved, while still telling the actual events of the avalanche. Like, bringing out those kinds of mentor texts at different grade levels, I think, are really, really important. You know, so the examples that I see are where teachers will say, okay, let's look at a few digital stories. Let's take them apart and think about them. What are, quite literally, what are the words that are being spoken or that you see on screen? How is that writer speaker using language in a really unique and effective way? What are the images? How do those images combine? What colors do you see? Are they close up? Are they far away? Are they of people? Are they of places? You know, so talking about the composition of the images, talking about the music, talking about the sound effects, what did they contribute to the story, those types of things. And so that's just with digital storytelling, but then you could do that kind of analysis with quite literally any kind of text. So even an app, a picture book story app, you know, on the smartphone or the tablet, where, oh, you press on this character and this character says this or does this, or you press on this and then the page flips. And why would you include those? And what does that help us do and think about as readers when we go from one page to the next? Could we incorporate something like that into our slide deck, or something like that into our movie? Would we want to do something similar? So just helping them understand kind of the broader, you know, moves that the writers make, but then also those little technical things that can really make a difference. Like, oh yeah, I do want to fade to black at this moment because that's going to be crucial to my story. I don't want to do it on every slide or in every segment of my digital story. I want to use it right here because it's going to make it really clear to my viewer that this was an important moment. So having those conversations about the mentor text that you find, whether it's a website, whether it's a tweet, whether it's a digital story, anything like that, you can, infographics, I think you can kind of help them deconstruct those and think about the moves that the digital writers made to put those together.
So I'm hearing you talk about mentor texts that come in so many different formats. And so one of the things I wonder about, and I was interviewed by somebody for an article just this week, and he said, aren't you worried about the balance? Aren't you worried if you're asking students to create video, will they be able to write term papers? And, you know, I responded, yeah, they're writing. You know, in order to put a script together, they've got to be able to write. They've got to be able to sequence. They've got to be able to use logic, to consider their audience, to do all those things. And so to what degree are we responsible for balancing the types of writing we ask of learners? I know that people are not passing term papers around boardrooms so much anymore, but how do we prepare kids to be able to write in a variety of different ways for a variety of different audiences?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so yeah, I think that's very important. So again, I pick up my pencil here and say that for my own children or any child, I would not want them to not understand how to put words into sentences, into paragraphs, whether that's on paper or whether that's through keyboarding. So I don't see it as an either or, I see it as a both and. So in the process of inquiry, in the process of organizing our ideas and asking more questions and finding more resources, they should be going through a process that would be similar to writing a term paper, or in fact, could be writing a paper as well as producing the multimedia. So for instance, in my book, the co-authored with Dawn Reed, the research writing Rewired, we were very conscious in the way that we were working with her ninth graders over a span of about 5 or 6 weeks to give them plenty of opportunities to write, write, keyboarding, and composing words and so forth, and also thinking visually and metaphorically and giving them opportunities to try out making posters and infographics and other things like that, that then ultimately when they got to the final portion of the unit, they were writing a paper or an essay about their topic, and they were creating some kind of multimedia representation. Is it hard? Yep. Does it take time? Yep, absolutely. And I don't have a perfect balance saying, oh, 50% this and 50% that. I think part of it is, when and how you go through that process. Like, okay, we're reading an article and it's got an interesting picture. Do you think you could use that picture in your multimedia? So this group is going to create a short video. Could you take that picture from the New York Times, of course, citing it properly, but take that picture from the New York Times and incorporate it into your video, but also take a few of the quotes out of the story and incorporate that into your essay. So they've got to kind of constantly be moving back and forth between the two modes. And I think that that's the way we need to teach, which again is a huge paradigm shift. And I know it's difficult to be thinking, oh my gosh, now I've got to get them to be reading and viewing and analyzing pictures and videos and everything from taking the picture from this source or taking a screenshot of a video. We want to show the way that this was portrayed in this part of the video, and then how the situation was portrayed on this other video, 2 different news sources, something like that. Like, we've got to help them, just like we would find alternate sources of text, we want to find alternate sources of media and help them capture and use those things. So it's an ongoing recursive process. I can't say that, oh, you should spend half your time writing and half your time doing digital media, because I think it's going to just depend on what particular assignment you're doing and where your kids are at and what skills you're hoping to teach.
Right, and it is contextual, and there'll be, and again, there's different purposes, right? So that sometimes I'm writing informally and I'm going to throw a tweet out there, and sometimes I know that my blog is actually read by other people, and I while I don't write for a research article in the same way I write my blog posts, I'm aware that my grammar matters. But I can play with my sentences in my blog in a way that I can't for a scientific or research audience. So that purpose becomes really important. And I would love to, the idea that we can give students opportunities to write for a variety of purposes now, that they might keep their notes together in some kind of informal blog or microblog. So yeah, and you also mentioned, you alluded to the notion of disposition. Writing is hard. You're not just grabbing things and putting things together. We're composing, we're thinking, there's a time involved in this. And I find that when I worked with K-12 learners, students who were not used to writing on a regular basis were confounded by the fact that they couldn't put this stuff together overnight. How do you build this kind of grit and as a disposition for writing? Is there anything that you found effective?
I think it just goes back to what Donald Graves, one of the, kind of, I guess, grandfathers at this point of the writing workshop movement, would say, like, children want to write, and we have to give them time and space to write every day. And there's some famous quote from him amongst writing people that I'm going to totally misuse right now. I'd have to go back and find it. But basically, someone asked him, like, well, what if I don't have time to have my kids don't write, to write every day at school? Then I can only do it like twice a week. Then he's like, well, then don't do it at all, because they're not going to get the kind of, rehearsal and stamina that they need. And so fast forward now to where we're at with blogs and tweets and, this and that and the other thing. I think part of it is picking a place that you can build community with your students. Maybe that's Google Classroom, maybe it's Edmodo, maybe it's Kid Blog, maybe it's Write About, maybe it's I don't know, maybe it's some proprietary place within your own school learning management system or something like that. But creating a community, giving them the opportunity to share, helping them become good at giving each other feedback, so they can actually say, yeah, that's great, because, and then name what it is that their classmates are doing as writers, celebrating that writing, all the things that we would see in a Nancy Atwell, Lucy Calkins style writing workshop, but just done digitally. And of course, to the extent you can, you're doing some of it digitally, but then doing some of it face to face. Pull it up on the smartboard, pull it up on the screen, or print it off periodically and say, let's look at what one of our classmates did, or let's look at what someone else did from, this other class or something like that. Celebrate that writing and give them the opportunities to see what's working, but then do it, every day. And there are great ways you can go about doing that, like Write About being one of those platforms. They offer a number of different writing prompts, and they offer you opportunities to have things in a closed community or make it a little more open and get feedback from others. Similarly, like KQED has the Do Now tasks that they provide that are probably more suitable for middle to high school students, but kids can blog, they can post on social media, they can take pictures, they can make movies, and then they can be part of that Twitter stream and see what other people are doing and make comments and give feedback as well. So it's not just enough to get them to write. It never has been, but it's even more important now that if we're going to throw their stuff out into the digital forest, if that tree is going to fall, then you as teacher need to be helping other people hear it. You can't just expect kids to post to a blog and send it a link to mom and dad. And yes, you might get one or two comments that way, but they want the feedback from their peers, and they want the feedback from a wider global audience. And so that gives teachers a different level of responsibility. And I think that's a little intimidating and sometimes scary to think that, oh, I've now got to connect my kids with all these other kids and do all this stuff. But there are people that are willing to do that, and places online where you can go to set up partnerships and things like that. So I think it's really important that teachers take that responsibility seriously and give their students opportunity to publish for a wider audience.
Yeah, I wonder how students continue to feel about writing for teachers' eyes only. It seems like an awfully inauthentic effort. And so even if the writing is very traditional, even if it is that great research paper that there is, the culminating 8th grade iSearch thing, we can still create a PDF of that document and celebrate it in some kind of gallery, right? Mm-hmm. So, that's a kind of basic level of sharing with an audience. But I think that an audience really makes a difference. That when it's good work, we should celebrate it. There's so many different ways to do that. Well, I want to respect your time, but if you could, I don't know, select maybe the 3 places my students should go. Of course, your books and your blog. Maybe you could mention those, but maybe 3, and then 3 additional places, or use any number you choose that you think are go-to places for my students and others, perhaps, to better understand digital writing or writing in general.
Okay, so yeah, sure. So I'll put my note there first. I don't blog as regularly as I should, so I'm actually going to recommend my Wiki space, which is hickstro.wikispaces.com. So
That's so
HICKS
important. Okay, sorry about
tro.wikispaces.com.
that.
And
H-I.
oh, I'm sorry, HICKSTRO.wikispaces.com. And that's where I continually update and put links to the workshops I'm doing and put links to the books and things like that. So that is probably the one resource that I would say right off the top of my head. You'll find my latest thinking and presenting and those types of things. In terms of other digital writing spaces. So here's one that's kind of on my mind right now, just, trying to figure out the whole, I know it's not even called fake news anymore, but figuring out this whole information literacy, where do we begin to start the conversation? There's a site called All Sides, and All Sides to me is an interesting place to get started. And then what I would want people to think about is after they read those and they see the right and the center and the left, to dig in deeper and to figure out, how can I cite this information? How might I take a snapshot or use this image that here's the New York Times, which is generally considered left of center, and here's Fox News, which is generally considered right of center. Here's the way that they framed this linguistically, as well as here's the way that they use these images. So just looking at that and thinking about what you can do to have students create those kinds of conversations, I think is pretty useful. Goodness, you're putting me on the spot here. So in terms of other kind of digital writing,
maybe the National Writing Project would be a good place.
yeah, yep.
NCTE too, don't you?
Yeah, yep. I do some work with NCTE. They have a number of policy statements and things that are available. So if you go into the NCTE website and search for 21st century literacies, and then the National Writing Project has a number of resources as well. You can go in and look on their website for digital literacy or digital writing, find some resources there. Another interesting...
you mentioned writing workshop. Is that Lucy Calkins?
Yeah, so I think when people think of kind of authors that embody the writing workshop, they think of Lucy Calkins, Nancy Atwell, Katie Wood-Ray. So if you need some foundational kind of background on what is writing workshop, how does writing workshop work, those would be the sources that you would probably want to go to as well. And then at the upper grades, you'd probably want to look toward Penny Kittle, Kelly Gallagher, Jim Burke. Those would be some of the names that would come to mind as I think about writing workshop in the upper grades.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Troy. This has been wonderful. And I'm going to list all those resources along with your video in our playlist. All right. So, on Twitter, you are?
Hickstro, HICKSTRO.
Okay, I'm hoping my students will contact you. Thanks a lot for your time. I'm going to stop the broadcast.